So I want to once again welcome you to the third webinar in the Child Abuse Prevention Month series. So my name is Jessica Matley. I'm a training coordinator and facilitator with an OCAP grant-funded statewide program called the California Training Institute, but our friends call us Caltrin. So hello to you. Today I'm going to be serving as your webinar host. I'm going to also moderate the panel for today's session. And as a reminder, about this session and about this series. Well, actually, I'll mention that in a second because I'm more curious to know about you. If you wouldn't mind, I would love to know in the chat who is in the room with us. If you would give me your name, your organization, and county, we'd love to say good morning to you. Just drop it right into the chat. So curious who's here. Name, organization, and county, please. I'll give you a moment to start funneling your answers in. Oh, welcome, LA County, Lake County, Solano, Sacramento. I was in Sacramento yesterday. Beautiful out there. Welcome. So exciting. Thank you. I'll let you continue that. So as a reminder, this theme, the theme of the month for these 4 webinars that are being put on is all about connecting communities. And today we're joined by 2 guest speakers to provide their perspective on serving families with intersecting identities. That is today's topic. So we look forward, of course, to engaging with you on this topic and learning from our presenters. So I want to walk you through a little bit of just pre-flight details here. The presentations, you can see our presenters on the board here. I'll be introducing you with a little bit more information in just a moment. But if you are note takers like us, if you enjoy taking notes as you go, if you want a copy of the slides, that information will be dropped right into the chat for you. It is a document that summarizes or at least has copies of the PowerPoints that are going to be shown today. Thank you so much. Jennifer from Caltrin just dropped that in for you. Something to note is you might notice that there are some extra slides in the PowerPoint. So although every slide may not be covered, these are extra resources for you so that you can access those after today's training. Your presenters will be sharing information and they might pose a question to you to answer into the chat. If they do, you're more than welcome to put it into the chat. We have a full hour-long agenda. We want to honor your time, of course, and keep within that time limit. So there is no designated time for Q&A. But if you do have a question, you can drop it into the chat and it may be answered at a later date. All right, those are all the notes I wanted to cover with you today. So what I'd like to do is really get us started here. And I want to start by diving in with our first speaker, Vida Khavar, who's a program director of Youth Acceptance Project. Vida is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has 25 plus years of experience in child welfare. She has assisted many organizations in developing programs that serve children and families. Vida was a consultant for the federal Project RISE, which aimed at improving the lives of LGBTQ plus youth in foster care in Los Angeles County. She is currently the clinical director at Family Builders, and as such, she collaborates with the CDSS in developing and implementing affirming policies and practices for LGBTQ plus children in foster care. Vida also leads the Youth Acceptance Project and provides her clinical expertise to several jurisdictions throughout the country. With that, I will pass over to you, Vida.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm Vida Khavar, pronounced she and her. And without further ado, we don't have a lot of time, so let's get to the next slide. Let's start. So I just want to talk a little bit. I want to give you a heads up that I'm not going to talk about every single word that are on my slides. You will have access to those, but I want to give you a little bit of a flair of what these slides are about. So one of the most important thing I think we need to discuss is that why are we talking about so much about LGBTQ kids? And the reason why is that we know now that about 34% of all youth in child welfare in the U.S. actually identify as LGBTQ plus. That's 1 in 3. So if you have more than 3 kids on your caseload, there's a good chance you have an LGBTQ kid. You may just not know about it. In juvenile justice system, 1 in 5 young people also identify as LGBTQ. And you can see also that a lot of these children, most of these children, whether it's in child welfare or in juvenile justice system, are children of color. And I think we really need to be thinking about the intersectionality of these children and what does that present for them as far as their experiences in the systems, as far as race is concerned, and also LGBTQ status. Next. Thank you. The Trevor Project is a national survey on mental health of young people every year. The 2023 result, those of you who may have not seen the report, I would highly suggest that you go on the Trevor Project website and look at it. It's a very thorough survey. But I think one of the most important thing I want to bring up here is that in 2023, 14% of all LGBTQ kids they had interviewed had actually attempted suicide in 2023. And so this is why we're talking about this. This is why this matters so much, is that we are really talking about life and death at this point. 46% of our LGBTQ youth had seriously considered suicide. And you can see there is a very high disproportionate attempt for transgender and non-binary youth. So when we're talking about these youth, we have to really be thinking about what they're facing. You know, if they have a housing insecurity, they also, report a past suicide attempt. And also that most of them did not receive the mental health care that they wanted because they were concerned about the competence of their providers. So I think we really need to be also thinking about that when we're serving LGBTQ children. Next. I just want to highlight that the children that I just spoke about, those are the statistics of children that, that they've interviewed. But when we are also talking about foster care on top of it, children who are experiencing foster care, LGBTQ youth who experience foster care are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide than the number that I talked about in the prior slide. You can see that foster youth, LGBTQ foster youth of color are also highly disproportionate unfortunately, in their attempt of suicide in the last year. 45% of transgender and non-binary youth who were in foster care also reported a suicide attempt. And you can see here that nearly 1 in 4 Black LGBTQ youth in foster care reported a suicide attempt in the past year. Those are really, really stark statistics that I think is very important that we talk about it. We talk about it with our colleagues. We talk about it with the people outside of our field so that people understand why it's so important that we take in consideration the intersection of identities of our youth. Next. So in contrast, we also have good news. We know that trans and non-binary youth who report having their pronouns respected by almost all people in their life report suicide attempt at half the rate just by respecting a pronoun. That's huge. Those are very little things we can do. Trans and non-binary youth who have access to gender-affirming clothing, garment, etc., also report a lower attempt at suicide. And finally, teens who perceive parental support regarding their gender identity are 93% less likely to attempt a suicide. So I think, and this is really the reason why we have developed the Youth Acceptance Project, which I will talk about in a minute. Next. So I think it's really important that we involve the families of LGBTQ children and youth. Historically, we have not done that. We have put LGBTQ children in shelter care. They go to shelter themselves. Then if they're not 18, then they go into foster care. Then they often end up in congregate care. So we really need to be thinking about why that's happening. If resource family or foster families don't want to have LGBTQ kids in their homes, and we know that they're getting harassed in congregate care in SGTPs, then why aren't we thinking about involving their own families to become affirming and supportive of their LGBTQ youth? Next. So one of the things I think we have to really be thinking about when we're talking about families that have experienced child welfare is, again, we need to be thinking about who those families are. We have to be thinking about the impact of systemic racism that have implied that families, Black, Indigenous, and families of color are not able or don't know how to raise their children. And we have to be really thinking about what experience that does leave for these families. Working with families who have experienced child welfare system must include listening to them and honoring their own experience. They are their own experts. They know their own narrative better than anyone else. And so we have to be able to sit down and meet family where they are and listen and not be afraid of asking the tough questions. If, for example, if you're white or white passing, asking the family, how is it for you to have someone like me in your home? Your experience have been with people who look like me or people who have the same type of jobs that I have? We have to be able to ask these questions to honor the family's experience. Families who struggle to accept their children because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, they still love their children. It doesn't mean that they don't love them. And we know that children want to grow up within their own community with their own families. That's who they want to be with. So I often say, remember, you don't have to understand someone to have compassion for them. And so if we're really starting with practicing cultural humility with families and honoring who they are, we can also work with them and support them in learning how to support their children, their LGBTQ children. Next. So what happens to family when they learn that their child is LGBTQ two-spirit? So we have to be thinking that the coming out journey for a child, there's also a coming out journey for the family. So a family might have certain cultural or societal norms that they've experienced all their lives that we have to take in consideration. Their religious belief, their lack of knowledge or myth that they may have about LGBTQ2S folks. The desire for their child to have, quote unquote, a normal life, their fear for their children. Now their children identify as LGBTQ. What if they get bullied? What if they get, experience more? We know if they experience more violence. So they have a lot of fear. They also have fear for themselves. What if they lose their own family, their church community, their faith community, their extended family? What will happen then? Families who have LGBTQ children, particularly transgender and non-binary, often also experience grief of not parenting the child they thought they had. And we have to let them process these feelings in order for them to be able to show up for their children. These feelings all these feelings I'm mentioning now, they're very normal for anyone to have. And so it's really important that we allow them to express and process these feelings away from their children. They also experience a lot of guilt for things they may have said or not said to the child, or maybe they think that by letting a child play with Barbies, a boy play with Barbie, that made the child gay, which we know it's not the case. But for a family, they may not have, that thought right away. They may feel guilty about certain things they may have done or not done. And then also we have to think about their fear being isolated from their community, their church, their family. So families are really going through a coming out journey of their own. Next. So what is the Youth Acceptance Project? So we have developed a clinical intervention to meet the specific need of LGBTQ families and LGBTQ youth and their families, whether in out-of-home care or already in child welfare. In out-of-home care or at risk of being in out-of-home care. YAP is a kin-first, distinct solution-focused, trauma-informed clinical intervention that we have developed, which is steeped in cultural humility, because we know that without that, we cannot work with any family. They will close their door to us, rightfully so. So we really take the time to get to know the families. And what we are realizing is that family can and do change when we offer them the support that they need in understanding their LGBTQ kids. So what we're really doing is a lot of preservation, family reunification, and of course, obviously, improving the permanency outcomes for LGBTQ youth. Next. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about our, all of our theory of change. You can see that on your own when you see the slides. Next. I'm going to tell you a little bit what the Youth Acceptance Project social worker do. You know, we work directly with the caregivers away from their children. We also work with the youth away from their parents, but we meet the families where they are. We help them. We listen, we validate, and we process their feelings away from their kids. Their feelings of guilt, of fear, of grief. Those feelings I've mentioned earlier. Once we have built trust, we really start providing information about sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. But trust and rapport is really what brings the Youth Acceptance Project its success with families. We attend meetings with families in the community. We refer parents and youth to appropriate medical assessment if it's applicable. And then we also help teams make decisions about permanency so that LGBTQ children get to maintain healthy relationships with their family. And of course, we train folks. We train STRTPs, we train counties, we train a lot of people on SOGI. Next. So I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to give you very quickly. This is what our interim report just came out. And we have a tool that we call the Caregiver Affirmation Abacus that allows us to measure a family's affirmation of their child. And this is all the increase that we've measured, statistically significant increase we've measured with the family. So as you can see, placement stabilization, caregiving affirming their child's expression and behavior, caregiver using the right pronoun and chosen pronoun and name that their child wants them to use, ability to address gender issues, and caregiving being able to advocate for family member and affirming and providing affirming medical care. So we have a huge increase, as you can see here. And I'm going to finish with my next, because I know I'm running out of time, with my next slide. We also do youth survey, and these are the latest youth survey that we have received. This is just a sample of what the youth have been saying. They feel positive about their future. They do not have thought of killing themselves or self-harming. They're saying that their parents, their caregiver are using the pronouns and the name they want them to use. They're proud of being LGBTQ, which is wonderful. Their caregiver stands up for them in the community, and they have family who loves them for who they are. So basically what we do is that, you know, we support family, they feel more supported, and therefore they have the ability to support their children as well. So I know I'm out of time and I will answer more questions later on. So having said that, I will end my portion of this presentation.
Wonderful. We want to say thank you so much, Vida. And to the participants, the way that you can thank Vida is to hit those emojis, those reactions at the bottom of your screen. So thank you so much. You can see them rolling up here. And of course, we'll be speaking to you in just a moment, since you will be one of our panelists here in just a few. So thankful for that. Wonderful. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Yvette Baptiste, who's our next speaker and Executive Director of Eastern LA FRC. That would be Yvette Baptiste, PhD, is a mother of children with special healthcare needs and Executive Director of the Eastern Los Angeles Family Resource Center. She received her BA from the University of Chicago and her doctorate from California School of Professional Psychology. Her thesis focused on cultural and community psychology with an emphasis on disability. Yvette has worked in the developmental disabilities field for 30 years. She has held leadership positions among service providers, management, and family resource centers. She has trained and developed curriculum from on-the-job training for direct support staff to leadership training for parents who are interested in public policy change. Born in Panama and arrived in the U.S. at 4 years of age, Yvette enjoys sharing knowledge and developing skills among parents, especially immigrant families who are seeking a better life for their children. I'll now turn it over to you, Yvette.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that introduction. It's a little embarrassing. I have to tone that down. And I want to thank you all for being here with us today. I use pronouns she and her, and I just want to thank Vida for such a wonderful presentation. And I know of the work that Rise did here in LA, and it was really groundbreaking and much appreciated. I am here to talk to you about the system of supports for individuals who have a developmental disability and those who are at risk, who are young babies and infants who are at risk of a disability, and what system is available to help those individuals and families. As I think mentioned in the bio, I have 3 children. My youngest was served by Eastern Los Angeles Regional Center and the Eastern LA Family Resource Center. So I will be getting you all some information. You don't have slides from me, but I will be getting you some information. So let me get going so I don't use up all my 10 minutes. So you're probably wondering how the family resource centers that I am talking about are different from the, say, OCAP funded family resource centers. So our network, the Family Resource Centers Network of California, FRCNCA, is a network of 47, sometimes 48, sometimes 46 FRCs that are funded by the Department of Developmental Services. So Department of Developmental Services, who are they? They are a department in the state of California's Health and Human Services Agency, led by Dr. Galley. And this department, which is led by Nancy Bargman, ensures that all Californians who have or are at risk of an intellectual or developmental disability have the opportunity to services and supports that will allow them to live a life like their non-disabled peer. And why I use that language at the end there very intentionally, because unlike any other state in California, in the US, California has a law called the Lanterman Act that provides services and supports through state funding and federal funding that other states don't have, that allows folks to get services and support so that they can live in the community as opposed to living in institutions, or as in other states where they live maybe with their families, but they get very little support during their life. And so the Family Resource Center Network have in common at least funding that is from what's called the Early Start Program for infant and toddlers. That's an early intervention program. So all of those 47 FRCs have this program that supports individuals who are parenting a child with or at risk of a disability, to help them to get to the next stage in life, say 3 years of age, where they start to be able to engage in their local educational agency, their school district. But before then, children are able to receive through that program different services and supports. And so that program is very essential, particularly in child welfare for infants and toddlers. And many of you may already be familiar. In fact, if you're familiar, give a thumbs up and or heart for Early Start. A lot of folks are able to make a referral to what is called their local regional center, and we put the DDS link in the chat so you can find your local regional center, because you can make a referral to any child involved in child welfare for to monitor their social emotional development. The FRCs provide there's a three-legged stool in Early Start, right? It's the folks doing the intervention. Well, let's put the regional center first. The folks doing the case management for families that are found to be eligible in the system. Then there are the folks who do the interventions. That's not the regional center. The regional center only funds it. And then there's the family support side. And the family support side is really to help families who need support for that emotional journey. Vida was talking about the fact that parents have expectations that, they have a child born or they have expectations of that child. And it's a real adjustment when things are different than what you expected. And so in helping parents to make that adjustment in their own time, the Family Resource Center provides parent-to-parent support. It provides information about the disability, referrals to other agencies, community agencies or disability-specific agencies. We also help to identify folks with who might need regional center services. One of the most important things is to have good professional and parent relationships, collaborative relationships. Sometimes those relationships can be fraught with tension or disappointment, and we try to ensure that both groups can develop the trust necessary to provide the support that the child needs. And then for early start, there's that transition out of the early start program. And if the person continues to have a developmental disability that's eligible under the Landman Act, they can continue in the regional center's second program, which is called the Landman Developmental Services Program. And if they have a qualifying condition, they can get services and supports throughout their life to live in the community as they desire. And the regional center has service providers that help people to do that. I think in regards to child welfare, the second program is most helpful to those with intellectual and developmental disabilities that become parents. Often those parents, those individuals are overrepresented in child welfare, despite the ability of the services and supports that are available to them. One of the programs that the Family Resource Center can provide is called a Community Navigator program. And in that program, families can set goals, either if they're a typically developing parent, but just having a hard time with navigating the services for their disabled child, or a foster family, a resource family having difficulty. The Community Navigator can help families to set goals and make strides towards the services and supports that are needed. And then the other program that Family Resource Centers have available, or many of them are family empowerment centers. I'm sorry, I just have to get the light on. And the family empowerment centers are for services and supports for those educational needs. And that's a big one, right? In child welfare, there are a lot of struggles and barriers, but if the caregiver, it would be it a parent or a resource parent, has the information that's needed, they can support the Family Resource Center can support that caregiver to navigate the IEP process, which can be very difficult, and is usually available until the child is 22. that kind of support. I think that might be all that I have. I am going to be providing some information for you about this later on, and so I promise to.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Yvette, for that helpful information. You'll see these emojis start to pull across the screen here as you provided an introduction into what it looks like in your services. And as you mentioned, we are going to deep dive a little bit more. So what I'd like to do here together is a panel discussion. So we've prepared a few questions for these panelists to really dive into their experience and ask some questions about the populations they serve and what that looks like. This particular discussion is going to center around serving and partnering with SOGI and IDD families. So let me give you a little definition just in case. Actually, I can probably just drop it into the chat. So you would see when I refer to SOGI, that will be sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. That's SOGI. IDD would be intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's IDD, just for reference as I shorten it up for us. So my first question is, what are some best practices for engaging and supporting those with diverse SOGI and IDD?
Yvette, you want me to go first?
Yes, I do.
I think what I spoke a little bit about earlier is cultural humility. Listen to the identities of the person who are in front of the persons who are in front of you. If you have a youth or if you have an adult who trusts you enough to let you know that they are identifying a different sexual orientation and gender identity, then the first thing is to thank them for trusting you. And the other thing I would say is, even if you're not familiar with the particular gender identity or sexual orientation they may have shared with you, it doesn't mean that those do not exist. It doesn't mean that that person's identity does not exist. It just means you're not familiar with the term that they're using to identify themselves. And so in that case, I would say to them either, thank you so much, would you mind telling me what that means to be genderqueer? That would be helpful for me. Or I would simply, after meeting with them, I would go and enter that term in my in my search engine and figure out what it is, so that I don't have my client or my person having to educate me on their identities. But I think humility is the best thing, and listening to listen, not listening to talk.
Yeah, I agree. I think that actually also applies on the intellectual and developmental disability side. That one of the things that we talked about this year, I'm a part of the CRP for prevention at the statewide level. And last year we talked a lot about the fact that there is, a lot of ableism in as well as other kind of bias, that people, both providers struggle with, individuals struggle with, and how do you challenge yourself around that? And it's really by being really humbling yourself in the process, making yourself vulnerable to the other person. Brene Brown talks about that, in order to gain trust with someone, they have to see that you are vulnerable in order to make themselves vulnerable. And so for individuals with developmental disabilities themselves, or for families who have those children, partnering is really important in a true sense. Partnering and developing that trust. I think I would add that there's a lot of siloing that goes on in systems too. And so if you don't know who your local regional center is, find out, ask, call, and ask to speak to their community liaison department, the community services department and the liaison there. Call your local family resource center and ask what kinds of activities and opportunities for engagement there are for you, your agency. And I think Vida would say the same about, SOGI serving organizations.
Wonderful.
Can I say one more thing? I
Please.
think it's something I failed to mention. So do not make assumptions about people.
Yes.
Do not make assumption.
Yeah.
I think that's number one.
It's a great addition. Thank you. And this next question is, when we think about the families that you are interacting with, this overarching theme of connecting communities, and what does that mean? What specific challenges might families be facing in accessing services and difficulty in getting connected in the first place? Are there any specific challenges you can think of that might be creating obstacles for them?
I think, and I'll take this one, Vida. I didn't want to put you under that pressure every time, give you a chance to think. I was thinking about this one, and there's a lot of challenges that folks have, but kind of as a social scientist, I feel like, yes, there are specific challenges that people have related to their identity, or kind of how the challenges they have in life in general. But I think people, kind of the overarching challenge that people can have are ones that are kind of these socioeconomic challenges that people have. So for parents who have children with disabilities or individuals with disability, well, let me take them separately, though there's a range. Things like immigration status, poverty, time, when you live in a high cost state, you know, a person with a disability, if we don't make assumptions, can work, but frequently are not working, and so are dependent on things like Social Security. And if they are a parent, time can be a factor. One of the video that we shared, I think somewhere in here, or maybe we'll share it now. The parent talks about putting on your oxygen mask first. And for a lot of families, that is the reality. So people might think, oh, you need to go and you need to go to the Family Resource Center, and they're going to show you how to apply for SSI, and that's what you need to do. Why haven't you done that yet? And we always tell families that, you know your child best, your family best. You're going to make the decisions that you're going to make. It's not for us. You have your own agency to make decisions. And so I think sometimes providers, families, when they're accessing services, social services, the people on the other end don't find out more about what their specific challenges are and really take that into consideration in figuring out how they can help them best access the services that they need.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Baptiste. I think, what I was going to say, which is very similar, is, to realize that a person's sexual orientation or gender identity cannot be understood outside of their, immigration status, ability, socioeconomic status. All the identities that make a person have to be taken into consideration in order to best serve them. And I think often that does not happen. We are kind of stuck. We're like, okay, I'm only going to serve LGBTQ folks. We don't take in consideration that these LGBTQ folks also have many other identities that make who they are. And one's journey will be very unique to one's. experience and to not assume that others have the same experience.
So you bring up this great point of this intersection and what that can look like and what that can mean. So if we're thinking about Child Abuse Prevention Month, right, and we're thinking about prevention, how do you see being responsive to intersections of identity, such as SOGI or IDD? How can that lead to prevention of child maltreatment?
I think that if we are thinking of preserving families as opposed to saving them or fixing them, but instead preserving families the way they are, and perhaps allowing them to ask us what they need, not thinking we know what they need, but ask us what they need, if they need anything for that matter. But also, for me, with prevention is also moving the dollars from people who, from child welfare, probation, all of this, away and bring it into prevention. Imagine the money that we spend on a child that is in a group home, what that money could do to help just one family who's experienced housing insecurities, transportation insecurity, food insecurity, disabilities, all that. We take all that in consideration and what we could do if we worked in prevention as opposed to reaction.
Yes, or control.
Oh, control, exactly.
Yeah, I think about that because I guess I'm doing a lot in child welfare this year because I'm part of the one of the subcommittees for the moving from mandated reporting to community supporting. And there's a lot of the folks who have lived experience talk about exactly that, Vida, that we need to, and I think times they are changing, right? That there's more awareness of the importance of prevention, and it's just a matter of how, it's not like a light switch that you can turn off, but you have to move, even if it's at a glacial pace, right? The arc is long, but it always bends towards justice. I did want to give a a shout out to the standards of quality for family strengthening and support, right? Because in that training, in those standards of practice for the family support field, there are sections that have a relevancy to how to be responsive to your community. And if we look at, I just have a few notes of the two areas, family centeredness and the DEI um, sections that they talk about in those standards. It's about the family centeredness is really about, and it's individual and family, about acceptance and engagement and making sure that we are engaging the families that we serve, the individuals that we serve, that they can walk into our offices or organizations or events and see themselves and have a welcoming environment, or that there are people on the board, or there are people making decisions about the kinds of things that happen. And that second, that diversity, equity, and inclusion, is really about demonstrating that other, that like Vida was saying, it's not a narrow set of values, it's an open set of values, and that you can, whether you agree or not, or you understand or not, you are able to take in another person's perspective and be open to that.
Wonderful. You've touched on this a couple times, the both of you have, and what does it look like to serve and partner with families, but from I almost think of it as like a 360 holistic approach. What does that mean? And so this next question kind of considers the levels of support a family may or may not need. But how would you speak to supporting both a parent and parent caregiver and the children and youth in a family? Do you see any differences in those levels of support, and what that looks like for them?
I know Vita's been doing that, right? So
Yeah, I mean, in the Youth Acceptance Project, that's exactly what we do. Depending on where the family is at in their level of acceptance and support of their child, if they are still in a very, not affirming and rejecting, we see them separately from their children so that they have a safe place, the family and the youth as well. They both have a safe place to be who they are and to express what they're feeling and experiencing, right? And so I think giving the time, letting families be, meeting them where they're at, um, and then also doing the exact same thing with the child. It's often a parallel process. And so I think when we say you don't have to understand someone to have compassion for them, it's easy for us to do this with the children because a lot of us have gone into this field to work with the children and child welfare, but we have to do the exact same thing with their parents. You don't have to understand them to have compassion for them. And so coming from that, we can then work with them, with the parents and listen and take them through that journey, hold their hand through that journey.
yeah, I want to talk a little bit about my lived experience, in this space, because we at the Family Resource Centers we do primarily focus on families. We don't serve children. We do have SIP shops, sibling support groups, but primarily we are helping parents with their journey. But it is very important um, to have both. I think from the reason that I say this is that when um, when when my family was receiving services and supports, and my then foster children, they were fostered and adopted at different points in time, but we had a lot of mental health services or direct support services, and there was direct support for them, but not enough support for myself and my wife. I was asking her about this last night, as she said, it would have been good if we could have gotten some behavioral support services for them. I mean, we got mental health services, which was great, but we were kind of left at home with these kids who were running wild and kind of had all these uh, stimulation issues, and it's a good thing her Scandinavian roots kind of cooled off my Latin tendencies. I'm very good with a chancla. But we were kind of there was this assumed competence for us that it doesn't really jive with reality for a lot of families, and it would be it's really important that we don't make assumptions about competence, especially I think about what Vida was saying about helping families, helping children, LGBT plus children, to stay with their families. There's a lot of support needed to do that, but families are willing to make those sacrifices, to kind of dig deep, right, to make those changes, because they do love, many folks do love their children, but it's hard. My mother had a hard time with when I came out to her, because in the Caribbean culture it's just not something that's well accepted. So, but she was there for me in the raising of these children once I separated from my husband at that time. So I think that, it's just really important that that not just the children receive the support, but that the parents receive support.
I just think about folks on the call that might be looking for some best practices, some advice, if you will, from your experience. And of course, not just your professional experience, but maybe also lived expertise experience. What advice would you give to other organizations looking to better support families with diverse SOGI and or IDD?
I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I would say, for me, I would say, do not make assumption. Do not make assumption. And if you have adults who identify as LGBTQ plus, I often hear that we need LGBTQ families to raise LGBTQ kids, and that is not true. We need affirming families, loving families to raise LGBTQ kids, affirming families. Do not assume that a family same-sex couple or will have any better ability to raise an LGBTQ kid. All families, have their own and unique needs and resources and everything. So I think it's very important. Do not make assumption. Do not invalidate the lives of anyone, the adults and the children, and meet them where they're at. Allow them, give them grace.
Mm-hmm.
Them grace.
Yeah, and actively do so. It's not a passive. I think I said this in another, um, thing I did, that, support is a verb. It's not, it's not meant to be passive voice. So you have to be super specific and intentional. You have to dig deep. You have to meet people where they are. You need to know where they are. You can't make assumptions about where you think they are. You have to ask them. And then you have to make that promise to work with them on what they want to work on. I said yesterday in a meeting that, yeah, there's another program for people with disabilities, and everyone is up in arms because a low percentage of people are taking advantage of it. But people have their own agency. They will tell you what they want, and then it's your responsibility to come through for them as much as you can. So I would say actively do so. Your posters, your ads, your social media posts, your flyers must be reflective of the population that you want to engage with. And if you don't do that, then they're not going to trust you. They're not going to know you. They're not going to want to know you in some communities, because they don't see a reflection of themselves, and it may not be safe for them to be with you on their journey.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And for those of you on the call, if you heard something, like I see some of the quotes in the chat, if you heard something that stood out for you, you can go ahead and drop that in the chat, or you can always give those emojis. You know how much we love to see you from the other side of the screen. So something that I'd like to do, of course, is to, on behalf of the panelists, to thank you participants for being here today for this discussion. On behalf of the attendees, I'd like to say thank you so much to our panelists today. And of course, all of the materials associated to this webinar. So that would be the recording, the PowerPoint slide, and the resources that were discussed today. Those will be sent to you in about 2 days or so to your registration email. We do have a couple of reminders and notes for you. This is the third webinar, which means there's one more to go. And that fourth webinar, you should be able to see that on your screen, is happening same place, same time next week, 11 a.m. It will be a presentation on racial justice as prevention, and it will be a full presentation by Corey Best. So we hope to see you there. What you should see in the chat here shortly will be a registration link for you to sign up and register for that. I believe that has been dropped for you. And also at the what we have available is a small survey. These surveys give us an opportunity to learn about your experience during these webinars, of course, in the spirit of continuous learning, development, and improvement. So if you wouldn't mind completing the survey in the chat, and we hope to see you. And we hope to see you in the next session next week. Thank you again, panelists. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.